Night fell slowly over the Wild West plains, casting long, silent shadows as the wind blew a mournful melody among the cacti and dry rocks. Amidst that arid expanse, amid the distant crackling of a fire and the sporadic sound of a horse neighing, walked Jack Thompson, a man who carried more silence than words. Jack was known in the region not for what he said, but for what he couldn't say, a cowboy whose voice had been lost in a past no one in town dared speak of. His imposing figure, with broad shoulders and calloused hands, contrasted with the vulnerability hidden in his eyes, a mixture of deep pain and a loneliness that seemed as endless as the desert around him. Ever since he lost his voice, Jack faced the invisible battle of silence every day. It wasn't just the absence of sound that isolated him, but the emptiness left by words trapped somewhere inside him, tied to a trauma no one fully understood. The simple fact that he couldn't speak made him an enigmatic figure to the residents of the small town where he had decided to settle, a man who walked the streets without greeting, who responded with gestures or a steady, calm gaze, but who never revealed his past or the reasons that had brought him there. People whispered on street corners, casting curious and sometimes suspicious glances. Some felt pity, others fear. The feeling was that Jack carried more than silence. He carried heavy secrets that could change everything if they were ever revealed. The cowboy who didn't speak thus became a kind of living legend, an almost ghostly presence that walked through the dust and time without making a sound, but whose story, screamed through his eyes, was impossible to ignore. In his solitary routine, Jack struggled not only with the barrier of silence, but also with the shadow of his own pain. Each step felt heavy, as if the world around him were plunged into a silence so dense it drowned out even the sound of his own heart. This man wasn't just a cowboy. He was a man trapped in a labyrinth of memories, losses, and a love that fate had cruelly taken from him. It was impossible not to wonder what had happened to silence that strong man's voice forever. What devastating storm had swept away his words, leaving only this suffocating silence? As Jack walked the city's dirt streets, the sun setting behind the mountains, his silent presence seemed to carry the weight of an entire universe. He didn't need to speak for everyone to feel his pain. All he had to do was look into those deep eyes, which had seen more than any man should bear. Silence, then, became a language of its own, a way to communicate more than words ever could. Behind that reserved expression lay a story of loss, of struggle, and of a heart that still yearned for something that seemed unattainable. And it was this mystery, the man who didn't speak and the reason behind his silence, that made Jack Thompson not only an intriguing figure, but a symbol of resilience and hope amid the unforgiving wilderness of the Old West. Who was he really, and why did that silence carry such weight? The answer, like the wind blowing between the hills, was there, unseen, waiting to be discovered. It was impossible not to feel an immediate connection with Jack, with his silence that screamed unspoken emotions and a silent longing to be heard, not by words, but by someone who knew how to listen to what his heart still had to say. And so began the story of a cowboy who could never speak, but whose heart searched for a voice in the vastness of that wild world. The morning sun descended gently over the rolling hills of Harper Farm, tinging the countryside with golden hues that seemed to promise a new beginning. There, amid the slow swaying of ripe wheat and the distant songs of birds, lived Emily Harper, a woman whose strength manifested itself not in loud words or grand gestures, but in the profound sensitivity with which she viewed the world and the people around her. Owner of a small property inherited from her parents, Emily carried a rare calm in her eyes, as if she knew how to hear what the wind and the silence were saying, even when no one else could. Her heart beat to the rhythm of the earth, to the patience of cultivation, and to the silent hope that guided her every action. Emily had a special, almost magical way of capturing the invisible. For her, silence wasn't empty, but full of untold stories, of emotions kept under lock and key, of pain hidden beneath, layers of unspoken words. When neighbors spoke of Jack Thompson, the cowboy who never spoke a word, she didn't just see a closed-off man, frightened by his own lost voice. She saw someone struggling to be heard in a different way, someone whose heart cried out for connection despite the crushing silence. From the first moment she saw him cross the town line, with his steady step and distant gaze, Emily felt a spark of curiosity and compassion she couldn't explain, but knew she had to follow. The Sut. Harper Farm was a few miles from the small town where Jack had settled, and it was there that he sometimes found a rare moment of peace. Not that Jack had chosen the farm. More, it was as if an invisible thread drew him there, as if his weary body sought refuge not only in the land, but in the serene aura of that woman who seemed to understand his silence. Emily watched this enigmatic man with a mixture of care and hope. She saw beyond the scars that time and pain had etched on his face. Beyond the closed expression he maintained to the world, she saw the man who longed to be understood, even when words failed. Without the haste or anxiety that marked the lives of those living in the Wild West wilderness, Emily gradually approached Jack, with simple gestures, a gentle smile, a gaze that didn't pressure but welcomed. It was on a cold morning, as he adjusted his horse's saddle beside his fence, that she finally spoke, not with words, but with a gesture. She extended her hand with an apple picked straight from the orchard, a silent invitation that Jack accepted hesitantly, his eyes shining with surprise and a slight tremor that betrayed his hidden vulnerability. From that moment on, an invisible bridge began to form between two hearts that seemed to speak different languages, but in truth sought only the same thing: to understand and be understood. Emily didn't need Jack to speak to know what he was feeling. Every movement, every look, every sigh revealed the internal battle he was waging, the anguish that filled his chest, and the almost desperate desire to free himself from the weight of the past. And she, with the patience and determination of someone already carrying their own ghosts, offered not only company, but a deep, listening ear, a presence that began to dissolve the ice enveloping Jack's heart. It was as if, for the first time in years, someone saw in him not an open wound or an impenetrable mystery, but a whole man, capable of love, of feeling, and of rebirth. The days passed, and that silent connection transformed into a delicate dance between fear and hope. Jack, accustomed to hiding within his own silence, began to allow himself to be drawn closer, albeit cautiously, albeit suspiciously. Emily, in turn, felt a genuine desire growing to break down the barriers that separated him from the world and from herself. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that Jack's silence wasn't just an absence of voice, but a wall built by years of pain and loss. But she also knew that somewhere within that silent man, there was a flame that needed air to rekindle. It was on an autumn afternoon, as the wind played with the dry leaves on the ground, that Emily, with the gentleness of someone respecting each other's every step, began to teach Jack to trust again. Not with words, but with gestures, the light touch on the hand, the smile that lit up the face, the invitation to share the simple silence under the open sky. And in that mutual exchange of silence and presence, something began to shift, as if Jack's heart found in Emily's serenity an ancient, forgotten melody, ready to be sung again. The ranch then became a silent stage, where communication between them blossomed unhurriedly, where every look carried an unspoken promise, where the painful past and fear of the future gave way to the possibility of a shared present. Emily became not just a neighbor, but a beacon of hope and tenderness, illuminating the path for a cowboy who had long sought something words could never give him: understanding and love. But in that connection that grew day by day, there was also an invisible tension, a hidden challenge between their gestures and looks, a question they both avoided, but which pulsated in the air. To what extent could that silence be broken? Would Emily be able to hear what Jack's heart hid, even when he couldn't or wouldn't speak? And more importantly, would Jack be able to trust her not only with his silence, but also with his past, his fears, and who knows, a future? Amid the swaying of the trees, the scent of the wet earth, and the distant sound of the stream, a story began to unfold that needed no words to be felt. A story about the strength of love, born in the cracks of silence, and the courage of two hearts who found in each other the chance to begin anew. The promise of that encounter lay not in the words, but in the shared silence, in that space where two such different worlds touched unexpectedly, about to transform their lives forever. And it was precisely there, in that moment, that their story began to come to life, ready to reveal itself in every gesture, every look, and every step taken toward the unknown. The sun was beginning to sink below the horizon, dyeing the sky a deep red that seemed to set the vast prairie ablaze. The shadows of the trees lengthened and danced softly across the dry earth, while the wind carried the scent of cut hay and the promise of cool nights. On Emily Harper's small farm, the day was drawing to a close, and with it another opportunity for that meaningful silence between her and Jack Thompson to transform into something new, something delicate and impossible, yet real. Jack, the cowboy who didn't speak, stood beside her, adjusting a fence with calloused, steady hands, each movement imbued with silent precision. Sweat dripped down his face, scarred by the sun and the hard life of the Old West, but his gaze, always distant and laden with secrets, now had a different glow when it met Emily's. She, in turn, observed every gesture, every expression, every unspoken sigh, and with restrained tenderness sought to respond in that same language, that of glances, touches, and shared silences. They had built a routine based on small moments that spoke louder than any words could express. From dawn to dusk, each other's presence was an invisible anchor that held them steady amidst the whirlwind of their own internal battles. Emily, with her unwavering patience, could decipher every nuance of Jack's silence, understanding that his voicelessness wasn't weakness, but a hard-built fortress to protect a wounded heart. Jack, for his part, felt for the first time that he could truly be seen, that his gestures and glances could be enough to create a connection that didn't require words. Each day brought a new challenge, communicating without speaking, expressing pent-up emotions, dealing with the weight of memories and fears that insisted on squeezing their chests. There were moments of frustration, when the difficulty of understanding each other seemed greater than the desire to connect. Jack, accustomed to keeping everything inside, would sometimes withdraw even further, creating a barrier that seemed insurmountable. Emily then used her sweet and firm way to show that there was no rush, that time and love could be powerful allies in building that bridge between two such different worlds. The farm, with its quiet mornings and starry nights, became the setting for a love that grew in the simplicity of the most basic things. The coffee shared on the porch, the silent walks between the rows of corn, the hours spent tending the animals, all of these transformed into acts of affection, silent declarations that defied the absence of speech. It was as if the very air between them pulsed with a new energy, an invisible force that united them, and despite the obstacles, insisted on making what many would consider impossible flourish. Emily learned to interpret the small signs, the way Jack squeezed her hand when he needed strength, the fleeting glance that betrayed his fear, the rare smile that escaped when something made her feel close to a happiness he barely dared imagine. Jack, in turn, began to open up in gestures that carried the full weight of a heart, yearning for love and understanding, showing that even in the deepest silence, it is possible to find words that heal and bring people closer. But not everything was easy. Limited communication made everything more complex, and the shadow of the past they both carried cast doubt and fear about what that feeling could truly mean. The fear of abandonment, of repeated pain, of incomprehension lurked silently, like a lurking storm. Still they moved forward, stumbling, falling, getting up, but never giving up on the bond that grew between them, with an almost palpable strength. It was a silent battle against fear and loneliness, and each small victory was celebrated with a look filled with emotion and promise. The nights brought moments of profound stillness, where the two would sit side by side, gazing at the stars shining above, as if in that vast sky there lay an answer to everything they couldn't say aloud. The touch of their hands, the touch of their bodies, the simple fact of being there present for each other revealed an intimacy that needed no words to be felt. In that silent complicity, a timid hope was born, a flame that lit the way to a future that once seemed impossible. Jack, the man once trapped in his own silence by profound pain, began to discover that love didn't require words to exist. Emily, with her gentle soul and open heart, showed that true communication goes beyond sound and speech. It lies in the attentive gaze, the careful gesture, the patience of those who know how to wait, and the courage of those who surrender even when there are no guarantees. Together, they were building something rare and beautiful. A love that blossomed in the gaps of silence, in the subtext of existence where the impossible began to take shape. But this journey, though full of hope, was not without its uncertainties. Each step they took toward one another brought to the surface buried doubts and secrets, shadows that threatened to extinguish that budding light. It was a delicate dance between fear and courage, between the painful past and the promise of a new beginning. With each exchanged gesture, with each shared silence, they prepared themselves to face not only external barriers, but also those within themselves. And so, in that silent vastness of the Wild West, amid the tinkling of the stars and the whisper of the wind, Jack and Emily took firm steps toward a love that, against all expectations, was beginning to become real. A love that, despite its limitations, demonstrated its immense strength and its ability to transform lives. However, that story still held surprises, challenges, and decisions that could forever change the destiny of those two silent hearts, about to be revealed in the next stage of their journey. The wind blew cold that morning, cutting across the plain with an intensity that seemed to want to tear from the earth all the secrets buried there for so long. Jack Thompson sat on the old wooden bench in the shade of a gnarled tree, his hands clasped in his lap, his gaze lost on the horizon where the grey sky seemed to reflect the storm raging within him. The silence that had always accompanied him now seemed heavier, weighed down not only by the absence of his voice, but by the shadow of a past he desperately tried to keep buried. Every line on his rough, sun-scarred face was a scar of deep pain, a trauma that had silenced him forever. It was impossible to ignore the ghosts that insisted on haunting every moment of tranquility he began to experience with Emily Harper. This woman, who had listened beyond words, who could understand what he could, never express aloud, was facing her own demons. Emily, with her quiet strength, harbored fears few knew, a heart that had been broken, a trust shattered by betrayal and loss that made her fear love, even when it was right in front of her. Her gaze, which had often shone with hope, was now filled with a silent doubt, as if she was struggling to decide if she could allow herself to dream again. Jack knew the past was a prison he could not escape. The tragedy that robbed him of his speech was not just an accident, but an event marked by violence and betrayal, an episode that robbed him not only of his voice, but also of his faith in others. He clearly remembered the fire that destroyed his old farm, the flames that consumed his family, and the suffocating pain of losing everything he loved. That day not only silenced his voice, but sealed his fate in a forced solitude, where every breath was a reminder of what he had lost. Revenge seemed the only flame capable of keeping his spirit alight, even if it meant living forever trapped in the past. Emily, on the other hand, carried invisible scars known only to her. Her farm was more than land and crops. It was a sanctuary that protected her from old pain, from the heartbreaks that had nearly destroyed her. She was afraid to open up, afraid to give her heart and be abandoned again, and Jack's silence, so dense and mysterious, yet alluring, also frightened her. How could she love someone who couldn't speak? How could she trust a man who carried so much weight and so many secrets? These questions echoed in her mind, making her doubt the possibility of a future together. Their daily coexistence, once a refuge, began to be tested by the shadows of the past that insisted on rising. Small signs of insecurity and fear began to emerge. Jack would sometimes withdraw, immersing himself in painful memories that left him irritable and distant. Emily, for her part, struggled to hide the tears that welled up in moments of solitude, as she tried to balance the desire to be close to him with the fear of being hurt again. The silence between them, once comfortable, became a space where fear and doubt grew, threatening to extinguish the dim light that had begun to shine in their hearts. Jack's past unexpectedly resurfaced when figures from his former world reappeared in town. Men from the time of the tragedy, people carrying secrets and grudges, who didn't want to see him rebuild his life or find any kind of peace. These shadows threatened to destroy not only him, but also everything he was beginning to build with Emily. And she, realizing the danger, found herself forced to confront not only her own ghosts, but also to decide if she was willing to fight alongside this man, who, despite his silence, spoke directly to her heart. Their internal drama reached a critical point when, one silent night, Emily found Jack sitting alone, his eyes fixed on the fireplace, so filled with pain that there seemed no hope. She approached slowly, feeling the weight of the darkness he carried, and, for the first time, tried to touch the soul of the man she loved more deeply. Words weren't necessary, but her gesture carried a promise that no matter the past, they could try to overcome it together. However, the question remained, would this love be strong enough to overcome the ghosts that haunted them? The tension between the desire to love and the fear of suffering created an intense internal conflict for both of them. Jack had to decide whether to let the past dictate his future, whether to give up revenge and pain to embrace a second chance. Emily, meanwhile, faced the dilemma of trusting someone again and surrendering to a feeling that could be her redemption or her ruin. Every look, every silence, every gesture became a silent battle that tested not only the love growing between them, but the strength of their very souls. And so, as night enveloped the farm and the wind continued to whisper ancient stories, through the trees, Jack and Emily found themselves at a crossroads, a decisive moment where past and present collided with an intensity capable of forever changing the course of their lives. It was time to face the secrets that threatened their happiness, to make difficult decisions that could pave the way for a new beginning or forever bury the possibility of that impossible love. The next stage of their story held the answers, but it would also reveal the true power of courage and hope in the face of the deepest shadows. Dusk slowly fell over Emily Harper's farm, tinging the sky with warm hues of orange and gold that seemed to set the scattered clouds ablaze. The wind blew gently, ruffling the leaves on the trees and carrying with it the scent of damp earth after the recent rain. On the porch, Jack Thompson stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the horizon that now seemed to hold more than just the spectacle of the sunset. There was something different about that moment, something that transcended the silence that had always enveloped him. The air was thick with an invisible tension, a weight that made time seem to slow down, setting the stage for a choice that would change everything. Jack, the cowboy who had been unable to speak since the tragedy that stole his voice, could feel his heart pounding with a force he could no longer contain. He knew there was no more room for doubt or fear. It was time for one final gesture, an act that would transcend words and reveal the depth of the feelings that had been trapped within him for so long. The past, with its wounds and shadows, still threatened to cast its shadow, but in that moment there was a brighter light, the courage of someone who decided to face everything and finally live. Emily, watching him from inside the house, felt the weight of that decision looming in the silence between them. She knew how much she had fought against her own demons to get here, how the fear of surrendering herself again had almost prevented her from dreaming of a future with this man so marked by pain, but also so full of hope. Now was the time to abandon her doubts, to trust in the strength of that love that had blossomed even without words, guided only by gestures, glances, and the pure connection of two souls who understood each other deeply. Jack stood slowly, his steps firm but charged with emotion, walking toward Emily. The silence that enveloped them wasn't empty. It was a sacred space where every movement and expression spoke louder than any words could. He held out his hand to her, not just as an invitation, but as a silent promise that, despite everything, he was here to stay. Emily, her heart racing, held that firm, warm hand, feeling a surge of hope that seemed to dissolve the last remnants of fear. In that instant, the world around them vanished. There was no past or future, only the present, intense and true. Jack made a simple gesture yet charged with meaning, a touch that sealed not only an impossible love, but also the courage to face adversity and the will to rebuild a life from the ashes. Emily returned it with a smile that lit up her face, the light of that connection capable of overcoming silence and secrets. The days that followed were a mix of discoveries and overcoming. Jack and Emily learned that love doesn't depend solely on words, but on the ability to listen with the heart and surrender even in the face of uncertainty. They faced the shadows of the past together, transforming pain into strength and loneliness into companionship. Every gesture, every look, every shared silence was proof that second chances exist for those who have the courage to believe. The small farm, which once seemed like a solitary refuge, became the setting for a story of redemption and hope, where love blossomed amidst hardship and revealed the power of personal transformation. Jack and Emily demonstrated that even in the most difficult circumstances, the courage to love can break down barriers and build bridges between wounded souls. And so, as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with the promise of new beginnings, Jack and Emily were ready to write a new chapter, one where the silence would be filled with the sound of hearts finally finding their voice. Their story wasn't just about a cowboy who couldn't speak and a woman who listened to her heart. It was about the beauty of life-changing choices and the power of love that overcomes silence. But this journey still held its final surprises, for on the path to true freedom, each step revealed not only the strength of love, but also the depth of courage required to move forward. The next stage of this story will show how these two hearts, united by silence and hope, will face the final challenges that will define their destiny forever. If you've made it this far, thank you for following this intense and emotional story. If you feel this narrative touched your heart or brought you something new, please subscribe to the channel. We always bring you moving and thought-provoking stories, just like this one. And since you stayed until the end, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end." I want to know who truly embarked on this journey with me. Oh, and if this connection between Jack and Emily caught your attention, a like helps us continue creating this content with care and affection. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and follow me there. It will be fun to follow this story together. See you soon.